Alright you guys, I know it's been a while since I did my last Q&A, but like I said, I'm going to start incorporating them back into the lineup. As always, there was a lot of good questions. If I didn't get you this time, I will get you on the next one. So without further ado, let's get straight to it. So Madman559 EST69 wants to know, with all due respect, can you tell us why you didn't leave the life when you knew the love of your life was ill and didn't have long to live, and you kept up the life of Rune? You could have been there for her and for the others who were passing, just wondering why you couldn't let it go. Because I wasn't willing to leave that life behind for nothing or no one. This isn't something I would have even considered. I was well aware of my girl's health conditions and the dire circumstances she faced when we first got involved. But I still wasn't willing to compromise my commitment or my obligations to this organization under any circumstances. Unfortunately, there was nothing that could have turned me away back then. As far as my girl falling ill or me having concerns about her not having that much longer to live, I always knew that lupus was a serious illness. I understood this from the onset when we first got involved, but she didn't really start getting sick until after I was already in custody. That's when her health started to decline and it became obvious that her time left was limited. And there's no doubt about the fact that this situation ended up inducing stress and expedited the whole process. But by then, it was too little too late. So Alon's over A00 wants to know, why was Conejo demoted and stripped of his power? Conejo was stripped of his street say behind allegations of him abusing his position as a padrino and furthermore, behind misappropriation of organizational funds. I functioned under Conejo in 1994 as his UB underboss. This was obviously when the street activities were operating under a different format and different titles were being used. But I functioned under him for almost 4 years. To be honest with you guys, I never detected any abuse of power or became aware of any misappropriation of money while I was working with him. Everything seemed like it was on the up and up while we were working together. It was a simple system. As his underboss, I generated money through the sales of narcotics, and 25% of my proceeds went back to him in the main bank. At that time, I honestly thought Conejo was a righteous brother, but there was something about the way he was managing the money when he got it that raised suspicion. This triggered an audit by Tibbs, and it was all downhill from that point on. Technically, Conejo could have been expelled for this, as that's considered a high crime. But a vote was held and it was decided that he would be demoted and stripped of his street say. So, at the Martin 9400 wants to know, what is your definition of someone that is game goofy as it pertains to gang culture? This is an easy answer as you see it all the time. When it comes to the gang culture, I think the definition of game goofy is someone who tries too hard to emulate the lifestyle and portray themselves as being something they're not. Being a gang member isn't something you wake up one morning and decide to be because you've seen a movie or because you've seen other gang members and now you think it's cool. It's a culture, it's a way of life, and it's not something you play with. People live and die for this culture, and there's a belief system that comes with it. In short order, gang goofy is when you see someone else who's trying to act like a gang member and they do some off the wall type of weirdo type of shit that makes you say, man, what a lame ass fool. Because of something they say, something they do, or some other type of mannerism that they're trying too hard to project. I understand that things tend to change a little from generation to generation, and that gangsters don't always have to be super cool. But there's just something that's game goofy about someone who's supposed to be a gang member that starts dancing around or making weird faces at all the wrong times. I'm sure we all know goofballs like this who are corny. I'm from the old school, and from everything I've been taught, there's an etiquette that comes along with that lifestyle. You're supposed to move and act a certain way. So when you see someone doing some corny ass shit, acting like a cornball, that's a good example of game goofy. You can't do nothing but shake your head about it. So Triple Crown winner 6897 wants to know, was there any serial killers over there that was feared, or were they pussycats amongst men on an equal playing field? As far as death row, I was with the majority of the guys that are considered serial killers in San Quentin. Richard Ramirez, Charles Ng, Ramon Salcido, etc., etc. And these cats are all overrated. You hear all this hype about these guys in the media, how dangerous they are, all the murders they've committed, and then you end up seeing some little short fat guy that's just like everyone else. If you expect anything more, you'd be disappointed. I remember hearing about Charles Manson and all the media hype that was circulating about his case, and then I ran into him in San Quentin. I couldn't believe it was him. He was about 4'11", and he was probably 95 pounds soaking wet. He was nothing like the character the media was portraying. The guy I seen was a small, timid, broken character who seemed like he was out of his element. You gotta remember, most of these guys preyed on helpless victims, women and children, so there's nothing dangerous about them. They end up being cowards in prison. The Night Stalker was on the integrated yard in the adjustment center in the mid-90s when we had that yard rocking, and that fool was terrified. The tables get flipped around when they land in prison. They go from predator to prey. So JB90s wants to know, considering Conejo and a few others who've been indicted and are on their way to the feds, I have a few questions. Can they buy their way out of their predicaments with the Fed carnales, or are they done? Do the feds have their own regiments throughout the U.S.? Now with the end of hostilities and the rise of the S&Y gangs, will the Fed carnales continue down the road of peace, or will it be an all-out blitz if the Fed and state factions unite? If you would have asked me this question 10 or 15 years ago, I probably would have answered it a different way. But after seeing some of the things that I have throughout these past 10 to 15 years, you just never know. Conejo, Chuco, and DC have obviously caused irreparable damage during the years that they hijacked the state system. A lot of the ground and the progress that took years and years to accomplish was lost. Through their own selfish indiscretions, these brothers allowed those years of sweat, blood, and sacrifices to have been made for nothing. Not only that, but then they also took it a step further by making it personal. In the face of committing treason, one of the highest crimes one can commit against the organization, they then sought to keep the organization divided by floating unwarranted rhetoric and personal attacks against righteous C's like Corny and Skip. So do I think they could buy their way back into good standings? I honestly don't, because that would send the wrong message to all those who've been watching and waiting to see how this was all going to play out. But on the flip side, it would be interesting if Conejo or Chuco landed and then tried to make a peace offering in the amount of 100,000 or 200,000. I know enough about Corny to say that I don't think his integrity can be bought out, but who knows what kind of effect money in that amount could have. It's definitely significant, and nothing would surprise me. As to the second part of your question, yes, the federal faction definitely has regiments throughout the U.S. Regiments are popping up everywhere, northwest, southwest, on the East Coast, Midwest, everywhere. This is how they've been able to keep themselves sustained. When these guys cut their water off to California, they had to improvise and utilize the resources that they had. In fact, there's already been several indictments reflective of these NF regiments in some of the more active states like Utah and Washington. As to the third part of your question about whether or not the federal carnales will either continue down the road of peace or if it will be an all-out blitz if there's a unification, that's a hard question to answer because there's so many other open-ended parts of that question that are still up in the air. What road to peace? Is the state system still acknowledging the agreement to end hostilities after what happened in Pelican Bay? I haven't been following that or haven't really caught any updates on it, but that's probably a question to answer first. It's a messy situation that needs to be addressed one way or the other. Until that incident happened, Conejo and Chuco could have presented adequate reasoning as to how this benefited the O and how this enabled them to generate a lot of money. But now, the worst case scenario happens. And then Sol not only gets hit, but this individual also loses his life. From the Fed's perspective, this is a I told you so revelation. So that's part of it. The other thing to think about is who's left out there besides C's like Silencio and Sleepers? What's their position, and what are they going to do even if they do get these directives? There's a lot of moving parts here, but either way, I don't think it comes down to an all-out blitz. I only see that happening on the merits of something like this end soul losing his life. Otherwise, I think it's a slow, gradual process, brick by brick, breaking it down and relegating that relationship that's been built back to what it used to be. It's a sad reality that produces no winners. But what can you expect when you're pushing the same prison politics? So B Cook 71582 FUL wants to know, one would believe in 5 or 10 years, Corny, Pinky, and possibly Skip will be too old to stay effective as generals due to their age. Father Time is undefeated. Will the next generals be chosen from the feds or the state, or vice versa? Or do you believe they all have to be within the same system? There is no set protocol, as far as I'm aware of, that stipulates that the next prospective general has to be selected from either the state or the federal system. Nor is there anything that stipulates that they must be selected from the same system. Yes, you make an interesting point. Time is catching up to all of us, and eventually time will definitely vacate some of these positions. This is an inevitable occurrence that nobody can stop or slow down. I'm sure these guys will stay the course for as long as they can, and that they will continue to act as advisors for however long they remain mentally able. But eventually, that day will come when it is determined that they are no longer capable of leading and that it's time to pass the torch. I'm sure this is something that they're already bracing for. These guys are in their 60s, so it would be crazy if they weren't already making preparations. From my personal interactions with the C's that are in the federal system right now, I would say that the next 3 generals are all going to be selected from C's who are in the federal system. There's a couple individuals who I think have the potential to be voted in based on longevity and their own individual merits. One that's a no-brainer is Baki from Salas. He's been around a long time and he's proven his loyalty. There was issues with Baki's wife Lisa, and then there were other issues with Baki interacting with Ziba that people might try to use against him, but I doubt this will be significant enough to stop him from elevating. Who's to say that Silencio doesn't deserve to be placed in one of these high offices himself? He made the ultimate sacrifice and he's also been around for a long time. However, he's got his hands full in the state system right now, and there's probably some things he's going to have to justify that have taken place over the course of these last few years while he's been out there in Salinas Valley. So, what's a Q&A without at least 5 questions from the Martin 9400? So Martin 9400 wants to know, did you come across a lot of individuals that were removed who 5 minutes after meeting them, you could already tell why they were removed? You got to remember that most of the time, because I was in a leadership position, I already knew. But yeah, there's times when you'll meet someone that comes out to the yard that's already been deemed a target that you'll say, no wonder this guy got himself caught up. Like if someone comes in and we find out that they ran during some type of conflict or they were accused of an act of cowardice, and then they come out and you see the individual and they're all skittish. They just look paranoid and like they're out of their element. Or there's been times when someone came in that had something questionable on their jacket and it kind of coincides with their character. Weirdos. And then there's always the knuckleheads. Individuals who had a hard time either conforming or complying with the program, or who tend to test your patience because they're either bucking the system or questioning why certain things were implemented. There's never a shortage of these guys that need to be removed or taught that it's in their best interest to just fall in line. You can spot arrogance or someone who's overloaded with too much confidence a mile away. So these are the only things I can think of that's even remotely close to what you're talking about. After doing so much time and after having been around so many different characters, I guess you can detect these types of things when they present themselves. So again, the Martin 9400 wants to know, do you ever get a laugh out of hearing someone trying to sound smart by using big words they heard somewhere but can't use or pronounce the words properly? Of course, I see it all the time on YouTube. There's nothing wrong with trying to elevate your vocabulary or trying to use a better choice of words when expressing yourself. That's how you progress, and it's got to start somewhere. But you can't go from speaking like a ghetto fabulous hoodster to a polished college professor 1 week to the next. It's a gradual process, and the rule of thumb is if you can't pronounce the word correctly, then you're doing too much and you shouldn't use it. So Out of the Trenches wants to know, why did you not take it to the Bay and plead fight for your career? I come from the same lifestyle and background and know how we hold our careers near and dear. On that same matter, why not go out on your shield versus simply walk away? I'm sure a tipping of a phone and an attempted spearing wasn't enough to meddle your strong mindset. These are fair questions, and although I don't think I'll be able to articulate the type of answer I want through this Q&A, I'll give you the short answers. Like I said, these are fair questions, but it's just not as simple as saying, okay, I'm not getting a fair shake here. Let me bring this to the Bay so they can investigate it up there. At one point, that actually was my position, and this was based on the fact that there was nobody there in the Santa Clara County Jail that had any business making these kinds of decisions. But then as time went on, a lot of things came into play at the jail that made me doubt that taking it to the Bay would have even had a different effect than the one I had already gotten. Keep in mind that everybody I recognized as official NF leadership were no longer in the Bay at that time. Corny, Pinky, Skip, Huete, Tex, Tibbs, Stork were all gone, and were all on their way to the feds. Chuco was the one who self-appointed himself as taking over, and I didn't exactly have a lot of confidence in him. But in the beginning, I valued my career enough to accept this, and Chuco did in fact look into it. This was after the phone and attempted spearing incidents, and he agreed that I should have been given the benefit of the doubt. I also had Dancing Bear on my side, so I felt pretty good at that point. But then Lencho started to employ dirty politics. The majority of the norteños in that county jail were rooting for me, and most of them wanted to see me get cleared. But Lencho and Chuco had a personal affinity with each other, and Chuco started sucking up everything Lencho was feeding him. Although they weren't supposed to, the homies that were in charge of communicating with the Bay showed me Chuco's letters in confidence because they wanted to keep me abreast of everything that was happening. Trust me, bro, the phone and spearing incidents were jokes. That didn't shake my resolve the least bit. If it did, I never would have went back to the active tears after. But I was fighting an uphill battle. The writing was on the wall, and it became clear I wasn't going to be given a fair look. I was ready to plead out and go right before the spearing incident. All I can tell you is this: my career meant everything to me, so much so that I was willing to take triple digits and accept a life sentence with no appeal action. But I had all the information right there at my fingertips. The Bay was involved, and Chuco maintained regular correspondence with the jail. I read his letters, and it didn't sound promising. At the same time, think about this. When your life is hanging in the balance, and the stakes are a matter of life and death, there is no margin for error. You drop the ball, there is no do-overs. That's it. Game over. Going out on my own shield, the wise decision may not have been the most desirable decision, but it's easier to say what you might have done when you haven't really been put in that situation. That's the best way I can put it. Had they just stayed the course and waited a few more weeks, they literally could have played me out of pocket however they wanted. Of course, I knew this, but I was willing to take that chance because my career meant everything to me. I know I'm falling short of explaining this the way I want so that you could really understand what I was up against, but I'll just close by saying this. I might not be the sharpest tool in the shed, but I think I'm a cut above the rest. I played this out, evaluated it every which way I could, and I looked at every angle possible before I made my choices. Why do you think I stayed in that jail for 10 years? Because I was holding out for as long as I could, and I was hoping that something else would have changed. Trust me, people can say whatever they want about the conversations that I had with my girl, all the things that got me in trouble, but I didn't do nothing different than what most dudes do with their ladies. The only difference with me is that mines were exploited. The kicker and the coldest part about it is that those calls would have never resulted in anything, and they would have never been the basis to sabotage my career if the DA wouldn't have exposed them. I would have ended up going to trial, blowing trial, and getting sentenced to life. I wonder how many cats laughed at my situation after telling themselves that they did the same thing to keep their ladies pacified. Trust me, I'm no Lone Ranger in that regard. Anyways, I hope you guys have enjoyed this short Q&A. I'm still recovering from this bad flu bug that's going around, but I'm trying to get another story out for you guys that I think you'll like. With that being said, I want to thank all of our new subscribers, everybody that's been supporting this channel, and I just want to thank those of you who have demonstrated your loyalty to this channel time and time again. Some of you have taken the good with the bad and the bad with the good, without missing a beat, without complaining, without bickering, and without all the negativity. The main thing you guys need to understand is that this channel's objective is to always put out as much content as we possibly can. Quality content that often requires time and research. If there's times that we go light on content, trust and believe that there's always a good reason for it. Again, those of you who have been there for the long haul seem to know this. Others will either get it or you won't. You guys enjoy the rest of your night. Continue to drop your questions in the community so that we can do more future Q&As. On that note there, this is your boy B, and I'm out.